Hi, welcome to Budget MTG Decks. All magic fun, all cards under $1. I'm David, and today we're going to be evaluating the Commander 2018 pre-constructed deck, Nature's Vengeance. Now, we're going to be evaluating every single card in this deck according to, of course, its strategy and its strength, and we will also be giving you upgrade suggestions totaling no more than $25. So, let's have a look at the Commander. Our Commander is a Lord Windgrace for 2, a black, a red, and a green. So for 5 mana, we get a 5 loyalty planeswalker. Its +2 is discard a card, then draw a card. If a land was discarded this way, we're going to draw an additional card. Okay, so it's cool. It really shows that this commander cares about lands. Next, we have -3, and that is return up to 2 target land cards from your graveyard to the battlefield. Cool, so those lands that we probably discarded with the +2 ability, we're going to be able to get those back onto the battlefield. It gives us a nice little ramp. And the -11, that is an insane cost. That is the ultimate. Destroy up to 6 target non-land permanents and then create 6 2/2 green cat warrior creature tokens with Forest Walk. Forest Walk, something we don't see very often, but what's also important to note is that, of course, this planeswalker can be your commander, unlike normal planeswalkers. Now, the -11 is brutal, being able to destroy both creatures, planeswalkers, pretty much everything that's not a land, so that's going to be awesome. And we already saw a little bit that this commander cares about lands. Now, so the role of the commander is going to be to enable that, to give us a little bit more of an advantage, and the ultimate is just, well, powerful, just removal. So what kind of cards do we need to make this deck tick? We've divided it into a couple of categories. Next, of course, the fact that we got one commander, we're going to have 22 lands matter cards. So these are cards that care about lands. We've got 11 removal spells, 11 advantage spells, 12 ramp spells, and 43 lands. Obviously, quite a lot of lands, more than usual, and that is, of course, because this deck really cares about lands. Now, did they succeed with that? We're going to find out by first having a look at all the lands matter cards. We divided the lands matter cards into 2 categories. One is the cards that have synergy with lands. So these are quite logical. These are really the cards you think about when you want to have cards that care about lands. And the random category. The random category is there because, frankly, I looked at the cards that Wizards of the Coast put into the deck, and I had no idea what the point was for these cards, so we had to make a new category called random. Let's get started with the synergy cards. The first card is Scute Mob for a single green. It is a 1/1 insect, and at the beginning of your upkeep, if you control 5 or more lands, we're going to put 4 +1/+1 counters on Scute Mob. Very thematic, should be fine. However, we did decide to replace this card and to upgrade it with a different card. Why? Not because it's not thematic, but we simply feel that having just a large beater with no evasion did not really advance the strategy of the deck too much. So we're replacing it with Rites of Flourishing for 2 and a green. It's an enchantment. It says at the beginning of each player's draw step, that player draws an additional land. So this is kind of like a group huggy. We're going to be drawing an additional card. Everybody's going to be drawing an additional card. And as well, each player may play an additional land on each one of his or her turns. So this not only helps us keep our hands full, but it also makes sure that we're able to play even more lands. And of course, we've got a lot of lands matter synergy in this deck, so this gives us even more value out of that. Next card, Turn Timber Sower for 2 and a green. It's a 3/3 elf druid, so nicely costed the body for the price. Additionally, when 1 or more lands are put into your graveyard from anywhere, that means it could be that they're either milled in, or we're discarding them, or we're sacrificing lands, and that's how they can get into our graveyard. We're going to create a 0/1 green plant creature token. So a nice little chump blocker there. Additionally, for 1 green and sacrificing 3 creatures, we can return target land from our graveyard to our hand, so not even to the battlefield. I think the effect is not that strong. I mean, it's a nice body, and it does slowly but surely create a tiny little army that we can use for sacking or for other purposes. Not super powerful, but, you know, it's okay. Up next, a Retreat to Hagra for 2 and a black. It's an enchantment with landfall, which means that every time a land enters the battlefield under our control, so either when we played or when we cheated in through a ramp spell, we can either have a creature get +1/+0 and death touch until the end of turn, or we can have each opponent lose a life, we gain a life. Now, sure, the landfall, again, thematic, but is this really the best thing we want to be doing in this deck? I don't think so. So that's why we got a new suggestion, and we're going to replace it with Destructive Flow for a black, a red, and a green. It's also an enchantment, and it states that at the beginning of each player's upkeep, that player sacrifices a non-basic land. So of course this is super nice. We're playing far more lands, we're ramping much harder, and of course we've got more non-basic lands. So we're going to make sure that we actually are always going to be on top, and if we don't actually care if our non-basics go into the graveyard, because we're going to be able to get them back some way as well. So this is going to hurt everybody a lot more than it's going to hurt us. Up next, Centaur Vinecrasher for 3 and a green. It's a 1/1 plant centaur with trample. Okay, nice. We want this thing to get big because evasion really helps. And when it enters the battlefield, it's going to enter with a number of +1/+1 counters equal to the number of land cards in all graveyards. So not just our graveyard, even though our graveyard will probably have the most amount of lands. And it also states that whenever a land is put into a graveyard from anywhere, we can pay 2 green, and if we do, we're going to return this guy from our graveyard back to our hand. So it's a nice, solid creature. Later on in the game, every time we play it, it's going to be, like an 8/8 with trample, and then people are going to kill it, and then, we're gonna discard a land with our planeswalker's commander's ability. We're going to pay 2 mana. We're going to get this thing back. We're going to play it again for 4. It's going to be again an 8/8 trampler. It's more, maybe even larger. This card does tons of work, so it's great that it's in there. We're going to leave that in there. Zendikar Incarnate for 2, a red, and a green is next, and it is an X4 elemental, and the X stands for its power, and its power is equal to the number of lands we control. Now, if this would be XXX, then yes, it would be much better because its toughness would be much larger as well as we get more lands. But this guy's toughness does not increase, which means that people can block it with 4 power, and they will kill it regardless of how many lands we have under our control. So we're actually going to replace this card, and we're going to upgrade it with Akoum Hellkite for 4 and 2 red. It is a 4/4 flying dragon. It also has landfall. It says that whenever a land enters the battlefield under our control, we're going to deal 1 damage to target creature or player. Plus, if it's a mountain that we're putting onto the battlefield, we're actually going to deal 2 damage instead. So it's cool. If we've got multiple lands entering the battlefield, we're going to be doing multiple points of damage, getting rid of those small utility creatures, and then again, it is still a 4/4 flyer in the air. So that's quite nice. Then a card that is exclusive to this deck, a Nesting Dragon for 3 and 2 reds. This is a new card. It's a 5/4 flyer, so this is even cheaper than the Akoum Hellkite, and it has even more power and also has landfall. So whenever a land enters the battlefield under control, we're going to create a 0/2 red dragon creature token with Defender, which also will, when it gets destroyed, we're going to create a 2/2 red dragon creature token with flying and fire breathing, which means if we pay a red, we're going to give it +1/+0 till the end of turn. So this is nice. This thing's going to be, every time we're playing a land, we're laying all these eggs. We're going to use those to block. People don't want to attack into us because then we're getting 2/2 flyers. So this is a very nice little token strategy. Crash of Rhino Beetles is next for 4 and a green. So for 5 mana, it is a 5/5 insect with trample, and additionally it's going to get ++10/+10 as long as you control 10 or more lands. So it's kind of like the Scute mob, but this one's got trample, so that actually means it's got much more value to us. So we're actually going to keep this in there as it's going to be a 15/15 trampler, and there's nothing to sniff at. Wurm Harvest is next for 2 and 3 hybrid mana, the hybrid being either black or green. So for 5 mana, it's a sorcery, and we're going to create a 1/1 black and green worm creature token for each land card in our graveyard. So already we know we are going to be getting lands in our graveyards because alone because of our Planeswalker's ability, and of course we'll be able to sacrifice lands. But in essence, what makes this card so great, I mean, just by itself, it wouldn't be that great, but it has Retrace, which means that we can cast this card from our graveyard by discarding a land card in addition to paying its other's cost. So as the game progresses, every land that we don't want to play, we can turn that into another Wurm Harvest, which of course will lead to another card in the graveyard, which will make her Wurm Harvest be even better next turn and next turn. So we can actually keep on using it. Very nice. Baloth Woodcrasher is also cool for 4 and 2 green. It's a 4/4 beast, and whenever a land enters the battlefield under your control, it's going to get +4/+4 and trample until the end of turn. And it is not unusual to be playing 2 or 3 lands per turn, giving this an incredible boost, and the trample really makes sure that it's going to get in there and deal some damage. Another crowd favorite, Rampaging Baloths, is next for 4 and 2 green. So for 6 mana, we get a 6/6 Trampler. And additionally, whenever we play a land, whenever a land enters the battlefield, under our control, we're going to create a 4/4 green beast creature token. Now, needless to say, this guy gets out of control real fast. It is a 6/6 Trampler. Usually, you don't want to attack with it. You don't want it to get in any form of danger. Just leave it on your side and start creating those 4/4 beasts that you can attack with. Rumble Hulk is next for 4, a red and a green. It's an XX elemental. This guy's power and toughness is equal to the number of lands you control. See, this is why we're keeping this guy in here. And it is a huge beater. It's going to be really big, but that is not only the reason why it's in there. Otherwise, we probably would have taken it out. But it also has Blood Rush for 1, a red and a green, which means we can discard this card, pay the mana cost, and then target attacking creature gets +X until the end of turn, where X is the number of lands you control. So it's also a surprise pump spell, which we can use to blow people out or completely kill somebody when they thought that we were attacking with something that was smaller than they expected. So this is actually a lot of fun. Avenger of Zendikar, a very powerful card for 5 and 2 green. It is a so for 7 mana, it is a 5/5 elemental, and it also, whenever it enters the battlefield, we're going to put 0/1 green plant creature token onto the battlefield for each land we control. So it's kind of like the other guy that creates the plants. This one is going to create a whole bunch right off the bat when it comes in. And it also has landfall, which means whenever a land enters the battlefield under control, we're going to put a +1/+1 counter on each plant creature you control. So it makes the other plants better. It's going to turn these ones into 1/2s and then to 2/3s. And as the game progresses, these plants are going to become much larger. Needless to say, it would be super awesome, of course, if we let this guy die and then we recur it and we put it back and we get even more plant tokens that we can make even larger. And the last of the synergy cards is Charnelhoard Wurm for 4, a black, a red, and a green. So for a whopping 7 mana, we get a 6/6 Trampler, and whenever this guy deals damage to an opponent, we may return target card from our graveyard to our hand. Okay, synergy-wise, it's fine. You could leave it in there. However, we decided to swap this card out for another card, and the upgrade card is Borborygmos Enraged for 4, 2 red, and 2 green. So for 8 mana, it's slightly more expensive. We get a 7/6 Trampler, so a little bit more power, but that's not the reason why it's in there. It's because whenever this guy deals combat damage to a player, we're going to reveal the top 3 cards of our library and put all lands revealed this way into our hand and the rest into our graveyard. Okay, so it's going to be ramping us into the land every single time it attacks, and additionally, we're going to have lots of lands in our hand. What are we going to do with that? We're going to discard a land, and then we're going to be able to deal 3 damage to target creature or player. So all that excess land, we care about lands, we want to have lands, and this deck has 43 lands, so we're going to have tons of them, and we can turn those excess lands that we're not playing and turn those into lightning bolts, basically dealing 3 damage at no cost of mana, actually. So it's a free lightning bolt. All we have to do is discard those excess lands, so it's very sweet. Then we move on to the random cards, and the first one is going to be Loyal Apprentice for 1 and a red. It is a 2/1 human artificer with haste with lieutenant, which means that if we also have our commander at the same time as we have this card, then at the beginning of combat of our turn, we're going to create a 1/1 flying Thopter with haste. Don't really know why this card is in here. It's got nothing to do with lands. It doesn't help our lands. Doesn't help our land strategy. It seems like a completely random card. So we're actually going to swap this guy out. We're going to upgrade it into Sylvan Safekeepper for a single green. It is a 1/1 human wizard that allows us to sacrifice a land and then target creature you control gains Shroud until the end of turn. Now this is amazing. I mean, it's a sacrifice outlet for our lands. We can get lands into the graveyard should we want to, and additionally, it of course protects anything we want. Any creature that we have is going to be able to protect it with Shroud. Instant speed. It basically says if this thing's on the battlefield, it's going to say, okay, you basically don't want to waste your targeted removal on my stuff anymore because I can I'm not afraid to sacrifice my lands to protect my stuff. You're going to be out of removal spell. My stuff's still going to be protected. Better use that removal against somebody else. Then we move on to Loyal Subordinate for 2 and a black. So for 3 mana, it is a 3/1 with Menace and also has Lieutenant, which states that as long as we also control our commander, then at the beginning of combat of our turn, if we, then they're just, our opponent's just going to lose, each opponent's going to lose 3 life. So yeah, sure, okay, every turn it does 3 damage. Does that have anything to do with what this deck wants to do? No, this seems out of place, so we're going to swap this guy out. We got an upgrade card for you, and that is Thaumatic Compass. For 2 mana, it is an artifact, and we can pay 3 mana and tap it to search our library for a basic land card, reveal it, put it into our hand, then shuffle our library. So that's cool. We want lands. We want to have lands in our hand. We want to make sure we're searching for lands. We want to mana fix ourselves. This is great. Additionally, at the beginning of our end step, if we control 7 or more lands, which we're going to have super fast in this deck, we're going to transform Thaumatic Compass. That's going to become Spires of Oraska. It's also going to be a land which taps for a colorless mana, but additionally, we can tap it and to untap target attacking creature and opponent controls and remove it from combat. So this is awesome against those really big fatties that are coming our way. We can't block it. We won't block it. Incarnate, maybe it's unblockable, it's got some form of evasion. Doesn't matter. We're just going to tap this land, and then we're going to remove that creature from combat, and it won't be able to deal damage to it. This is absolutely brutal against people who want to have some kind of Voltron strategy against us. Then we have a Bloodtracker for 3 and a black. It's a 2/2 flyer for which we can pay a black and 2 life for to put a +1/+1 counter on it. And additionally, when it leaves the battlefield, we're going to draw a card for each +1/+1 counter on it. In a Vampire Tribal deck, awesome. I would love it. In a maybe sort of focused evasion deck, maybe I don't really see the point of this card in this deck particularly. I don't see where the synergy lies. That's why I put it in random. Let's have a look at what we have as a suggestion. Let's upgrade it into Ramunap Excavator for 2 and a green. It is a 2/3 Naya Cleric, and it states that you may play land cards from your graveyard. Bam. What? This is what you want, right? Why is this card not... I'm not going to get upset. I'm just saying this card should have been in the deck. It is sweet. It is exactly what this deck wants to do if the deck would be a little bit more focused on lands mattered and not we've got a cool vampire with +1/+1 counters. Anyway. Reality Scramble is next for 2 and 2 red, so for 4 mana, it's a sorcery, and it states that you can put a permanent you own on the bottom of your library. Then we're going to reveal cards from the top of our library until we reveal a card that shares a card type with that permanent, and then put that card into the battlefield and the rest of the bottom of your library in any order. So this is basically, it's kind of like a polymorph. You know, you say, okay, I'm going to get rid of this this enchantment, so now I'm going to go top of the library until I find another enchantment, put it onto the battlefield. And you can retrace it by casting this card from a graveyard by discarding a land. So yeah, you can keep on redoing it. Hopefully you get something good. It's very red in the sense that it's very chaotic and random, but this deck doesn't really thrive on chaotic and random. We just want to have lots of lands, and we want to use our lands to the greatest advantage. You get lots of value out of that. And Reality Scramble just adds dice rolling into it, and I don't really see the point. So we have an upgrade suggestion, and that is Splendid Reclamation. For 3 and a green, it is a sorcery. We're going to return all land cards from our graveyard to the battlefield tapped. Okay, great. So as the game's progressing, we're sacking our lands, we're discarding our lands, we're milling our lands, we're getting all these lands into the graveyard. And then we play this, and then we're putting them all onto the battlefield tapped, and that is going to be absolutely amazing. And we've played this in other decks as well, playtesting Gitrog Monster, for example, and it is an absolute powerhouse. Beautiful. Next up, Fury Storm for 2 and 2 red, so for 4 mana. It's an instant that allows us to copy target instant sorcery, but we're gonna cast this an additional time for each time we've cast our commander from the command zone this game. So yeah, you can copy instant sorceries multiple times. Is this an instant sorcery deck? Does it care a lot about instant sorceries? Does it have a lot of instant sorceries? No. Does it have some? Yes, you might be able to get some value out of it, but just it's also 4 mana, and I just don't see the point of this. So we're gonna actually, for this deck, I mean, it's an okay card, but just in a deck that actually cares about this kind of stuff, and this deck does not. So we're going to upgrade it to Horn of Greed for 3 mana. It is an artifact that states that whenever a player plays a land, that player draws a card. Bam. That's what we want to do. We're putting in those lands. We're drawing cards. We're getting more lands. We're playing more lands. Bam, bam, bam. And we're getting lots and lots of value out of that. Far more than anybody else. And then we move on to Loyal Guardian for 4 and a green. So it is for 5 mana, a 4/4 Trampler. It's got Lieutenant again, so at the beginning of combat of our turn, if we do control our commander as well, we're going to +1/+1 counter on each creature we control. Great. If we're going to go super tokens, yes, you could leave it in there if you can hope that you're going to get those plants, for example. However, we thought, let's go for something a little bit more consistent. We're upgrading this card into Sylvan Scrying for 1 and a green. It's a sorcery that allows us to search our library for a land card, reveal it, put it into our hand, then shuffle our library. This does not say go look for a basic land. This says go look for any land in your deck. So you can exactly look for that land, that non-basic land that you need, and you're going to put that into your hand and be able to play it next turn. So that is going to be super, super awesome. Up next is Emissary of Grudges for 5 and a red. It is a 6/5 Efreet with flying and haste, so it's a nice beater. When it enters the battlefield, we're going to secretly choose an opponent, and then later on we can reveal that player that we chose, and then we're going to choose new targets for target spell or ability if it targeted us or a permanent we control, and then so we can just change it to another target. So somebody played a removal spell, and we play this one, and then later on, of course, we would have to secretly show that it was that person. So it's a lot of hoops to jump to do. Once again, is this really what this deck wants to do? Not really. It's a fun card, but let's see if we got something better. And I think we do. We have the upgrade card is Courser of Crufix for 1 and 2 green. It is a 2/4 Centaur. And it states that we can play with the top card of our library revealed. Okay, so that's nice. We're going to be able to always see what's coming up. Our opponents also see what's coming up. But that gives us an advantage because we may play the top card of our library if it's a land. And we're playing a disproportionately large amount of lands, which means we're going to be able to play those in addition to the one land per turn that we can play every turn. So we can play multiple lands, which is awesome. And then when a land enters the battlefield under your control, we're going to gain a life. Okay, that's nothing to write home about, but still gaining us that incidental life could make a difference over the long run. Next card is Thanis, the War Weaver, for 3, a black, a red, and a green. So for 6 mana with a 5/5 Vigilance Reach, this is a nice attacker, a nice blocker. Stops all those flyers in the air. Additionally, it states all creatures attack each combat if able. The bad thing about this, of course, this is also your creature, so you got to really be careful with this card. If you do want to play it, it does put you in that dangerous position that you will have to be attacking with all your stuff as well, also stuff that you don't want to lose. And also states whenever a creature attacks you or a planeswalker you control, put a +1/+1 counter on Thanos, the War Weaver. So they will have to attack, and should people attack you, this thing is going to get crazy large, super fast, and of course it has the vision, it has the reach, it can attack and block at the same time. It's actually a pretty fun card. We're going to leave it in there, even though it doesn't really do what you want to be doing in this deck. But it's relatively solid, so we're going to keep it in there. Flame Blast Dragon is next for 4 and 2 red. It is a 5/5 flying dragon. And we can, whenever we attack with this card, we can pay X and our red, and then we're going to be dealing X damage to target creature or player. It's pretty cool. You can attack. It's kind of got removal. However, we have decided to swap this card out because we found a card that I think would do a little bit better in this deck, and that is Omnath, Locus of Rage for 3, 2 red, and 2 green. So for 7 mana, it is a 5/5 legendary elemental with landfall. And that says so whenever a land enters the battlefield under your control, we're going to put a 5/5 red and green elemental creature token onto the battlefield. So cool, this is like the Baloths, Rampaging Baloths, but now we're going to be putting a 5/5 rather than a 4/4 onto the battlefield. And additionally, whenever a Locus of Rage or another elemental you control dies, we're going to deal 3 damage to target creature or player. Now, this really sets you up in a position where if you've got a couple of these elementals, people don't want to start destroying them because they're going to start in combat, because then you're going to be dealing 3 damage to their creatures, to their face. Board wipe all of a sudden becomes an extreme danger. You can just tell people, hey, I've got 6 elementals over here. If you board wipe me, I'm going to make sure all that damage goes straight to your face, and then people are going to be super, super scared of that. Okay, those are the Lands Matters cards. Let's have a look at the removal. We divided the removal spells into targeted removal and board wipes. Now, the first of the targeted removal is Consign to Dust for 2 and a green. It's an instant. We're going to destroy any number of target artifacts or enchantments, and for each extra target above the first, we're going to have to pay another 2 and a green. So it's cool that instant speed we can destroy an artifact or enchantment, but if we have extra mana, which we probably will because we're so focused on lands, we can destroy multiple ones. Quite decent. Putrefy is next for 1, a black, and a green. So for 3 mana, it's an instant. We're going to destroy target artifact or creature, and it can't be regenerated. I like the versatility. Usually we're going to want to be hitting creatures, but I like the versatility that it gives us the option to also destroy artifacts should we want to. Ruinous Path is next for 1 and 2 black. We're going to destroy, it's a sorcery this time, so we can't use it instant speed, but it allows us to destroy target creature or planeswalker. They're good because a lot of these pre-constructed decks have planeswalkers as commanders. And of course, some of the old ones have that as well, so it's nice to give you that little flexibility. And it also has Awaken 4, which means that if we pay 5 and 2 black, we're going to be able to pay 7 mana in essence, do exactly the same thing, destroy target creature or planeswalker, but we're also going to put 4 +1/+1 counters on a land, and it's actually going to become a creature as well. Up next is Decimate for 2, a red, and a green. So for 4 mana, it's a sorcery. It's going to allow us to destroy target artifact, creature, enchantment, and land. Now, it's important to remember that we need all of these targets. You cannot do it if you don't have a land to target, for example. Well, you probably always will, but let's say you don't have an enchantment. Nobody has an enchantment. We will not be able to play this. So we need all the targets, but if it does, we're blowing out a lot of cool stuff. Acidic Slime is next for 3 and 2 green. It is a 2/2 with Death Touch that allows us to destroy target artifact, enchantment, or land when it enters the battlefield. And next, and this is an awesome new spell that they put in here. I love it. Windgrace's Judgment for 3, a black, and a green. So for 5 mana, it's an instant that allows us to destroy a non-land permanent for each opponent we have. So if we're playing a 4-player game, we've got 3 opponents we play, we're able to destroy non-land permanent for each of those players. So that's really sweet, actually. Then we move on to the board wipes. The first one is Savage Twister for X, a red and a green. It's a sorcery that deals X damage to each creature. So of course we're playing lands mana. We're playing lots of lands. We got lots of mana. We can really turn this into as much damage as you want to kill pretty much every creature on the board. Lavalanche is next for X, a black, a red, and a green. So it's for an extra black. But this sorcery deals X damage to target player and each creature he or she controls. So not only are we also dealing damage to the dome of one person, but we're also limiting it to, it's a one-sided board wipe to just one opponent. And finally, we've got finally we have, it's not the last card, Gaze of Granite for X, 2 black, and a green. It's a sorcery that destroys each non-land permanent with converted mana cost X or less. Now this deck focuses a lot less on artifact ramp. A lot of the other decks do, which means it's really nice to play, for example, this for 6 mana and get rid of each non-land permanent of 3 or less, and that hits pretty much all the mana rocks, which is super nice. Blow them out. Up next is Chain Reaction for 2 and 2 red. So for 4 mana, it's a sorcery that deals X damage to each creature, where X is the number of creatures on the battlefield. So where things get a little bit crazy, gets a little bit too out of hand, people have too much stuff, we play this, it's pretty much going to do 20 damage to all creatures if there's 20 creatures on the battlefield. So I've never seen it not wipe the board. So it's always a very inexpensive board wipe for just 4 mana. And finally, we have Whip-Tongue Hydra for 5 and a green. It's a 4/4 with reach. And when this guy enters the battlefield, we're going to destroy all creatures with flying and put a +1/+1 counter on this guy for each creature destroyed this way. So this is a nice board wipe. It's very specific towards just hitting the flyers, but we don't have a lot of flyers, so that means that we don't really care. We're going to pop it down, and whichever flyers it takes down with it, it turns into +1/+1 counters, making it a really big reacher and protecting us against future flyers. Those are the removal spells. Let's have a look at the advantage cards. We divided the advantage cards into 2 categories. The recursion, this deck cares a lot about getting stuff back from the graveyard, and the straight up draw spells. We're going to start with the recursion spell, and that is Stitch Together for 2 black. It's a sorcery that allows us to return target creature card from our graveyard back to our hand, but it has threshold, which means that if we have 7 or more cards in our graveyard, which we're definitely going to go for, our commander also focuses on that, getting cards in the graveyard, then we're going to return that card to the battlefield instead. So this is a nice little reanimation spell for simply 2 mana. Essentially, if we play it right, for 2 mana, it's going to get a creature back from the graveyard straight onto the battlefield, cheating it in. That's pretty cool. Up next is Budoka Gardener for 1 and a green. So for 2 mana, it is a 2/1 creature, Human Monk, and we can tap it to put a land card from our hand into play. So that's nice. So we can get a little bit of the extra ramp if we've got more cards in our hand. And additionally, if we control 10 or more lands, we're going to flip it. Now it's going to flip into Dokai Weaver of Life, and it allows us that for 6 mana and tapping it to put a XX green elemental creature token into play, where X is the number of lands we control. So every turn we're going to have more than 10 lands. So in essence, this thing's always going to be a 10/10 or larger for 6 mana. We can do that every single turn. Grapple with the Past for 1 and a green. It is an instant. And we're going to put the top 3 cards of our library into our graveyard. Then we may return a creature card or land card from our graveyard back to our hand. So essentially it allows us to dig for a little bit. And, we could choose to get a creature, but usually you get a land back and then play it. Grisly Salvage is next for a black and a green. It's an instant, this one. Same as the last one. And we reveal the top 5 cards this time, not 3. And we're going to put a creature or land card from among them into our hand and put the rest into our graveyard. So this one's the ones that we're getting straight from the library. And then we have Gyrus, a Waker of Corpses for X, a black, a red, and a green. It is a 0/0 legendary Hydra. And when he enters the battlefield, it's going to enter with the number of +1/+1 counters equal to the number of mana used to cast it. So essentially, if we pay 6 mana for this, it's going to come in as a 3/3. So we're going to want to put a lot of mana into it, make sure it's nice and chunky. And it also states that whenever it attacks, we may exile target creature card with lesser power from your graveyard. If you do, create a token that's a copy of that card that's tapped and attacking. Exile the token at the end of combat. So it's cool. It's a nice card. It's fun. It allows us to reanimate something. But the problem is we did exile that card, and the token, after it's done attacking, will also be exiled. So we really are limiting ourselves to not being able to recur multiple times. So you do have to remember that. Then we have Soul of Innistrad for 4 and 2 black. It's a 6/6 Death Toucher, so that's nothing to sniff at. That's always great, Death Touchers. This is a big guy as well. And for 3 and 2 black, so for 5 mana, we can return 3 creature cards from our graveyard back to our hand, and then we can play them again, so it doesn't reanimate them straight to the battlefield, but we do get them back into our hand ready to be played. And additionally, should this card be in our graveyard because it died, or because we discarded it, then we can still pay 3 and 2 black, still the 5 to return 3 creature cards from our graveyard back to our hand, but we do have to exile this card though. So we can only do it one more time after it's dead. Moldgraph Monstrosity is the last of the recursion cards, and that is for 3 green, so for 7 mana. It is an 8/8 trampler, and this beast is huge, deals tons of damage, but additionally, when it dies, people want to kill it because it's an 8/8 trampler. We're going to exile it and then return 2 creature cards at random from my graveyard back straight to the battlefield. So this reanimates them perfectly, and that is going to be super, super awesome. Then we move on to the draw spells. Sancha, Sleeper Agent for 1, a black and a red. So for 3 mana, we get a 5/5 minion. Now this thing is insanely large. However, when it enters the battlefield, an opponent of your choice is going to gain control of it. You can say, wait a minute, that's not great. We just paid 3 mana for a 5/5. Now somebody else has got it. But this thing is going to attack each turn if able, and will not be able to attack us. So, or planeswalker we control. So that's nice. So we just gave somebody a 5/5 to start beating face against the other players. So it's a nice political game. And additionally, for 3 mana, Sancha's controller loses 2 life, so the person who we gave the card to, and we're going to draw a card. Any player may activate this ability. So other people may want to pay into it so that they're taking a lot of damage. And of course, to draw cards. So that's the double functionality. So this is a nice little political. You do give a little bit of advantage to other players as well, but mostly the person you give this to, they're going to be at a great disadvantage because people are going to be dealing tons of damage to it. But then again, they do have a 5/5 that they can smack people's faces in with. Up next, Seer's Sundial for 4 mana. It's an artifact with landfall. Whenever land enters the battlefield under our control, we can pay 2 mana. If we do, we're going to draw cards. This is a nice little draw engine based on the lands that we're going to be playing. And then we have a Deathreap Ritual for 2, a black and a green. This is an awesome enchantment. It's got Morbid, which means that at the beginning of each end step, if a creature dies this turn, doesn't matter whose creature, could be yours, or it could be somebody else's, we're going to draw a card. So this is almost consistently every single turn. At the end of the turn, we're going to draw a card. And this is not only your turn, this is everybody's end step. So that's multiple draws per round around the table. And then we have the last of the draw cards, and that is Moonlight Bargain for 3 and 2 blacks. So for 5 mana, it's an instant. We're going to look at the top 5 cards of our library, and then for each card, we're going to put that card into our graveyard unless we pay 2 mana, and then we're going to put that into our hand. So essentially, we could draw 5 cards, but it will cost us 10 life, which might be a little bit too much. So just check out what you want to keep and throw the rest into the graveyard. Those are the advantage cards. Let's have a look at the ramp cards. The first of our ramp cards, of course, this deck cares about lands. This deck wants to ramp into as many lands as possible. So, of course, the first ramp card we have is Soul Ring for 1. It is an artifact that taps for 2 colorless. Yes, it's a good card. It's got no synergy with his deck. So, well, just leave it in. It's fine. Then we have Explore for 1 and a green. It's a sorcery that allows us to play an additional land this turn, and it draws as a card. Okay, that's nice. That at least does a little bit of what we want. Colony Heart Expedition for 1 and a green. It's an enchantment with landfall, and whenever land enters the battlefield under our control, we're going to put a quest counter on this card. Then if we have 3 quest counters on here, we're going to sacrifice it, and then we're going to be able to search our library for 2 basic land cards and put them onto the battlefield tapped. It's pretty nice. So it comes in on turn 2, and then as we're playing lands, this thing is going to get sacrificed, and then we're going to get 2 tapped lands for it. Borderland Explorer is next for 1 and a green. It's a 3/1 Elf Scout, and when it enters the battlefield, we may discard a card. Any player may do this. So we're going to go around the table. Everybody's going to have the option to discard a card. And then if you did discard a card, we're going to search our library for a basic land card and reveal it, and then put it into our hand, and then shuffle our library. So it's nice to, early on in the game, make sure we can color fix ourselves. Or make sure even if we don't have enough lands, we can get an extra land. Sakura Tribe Elder is next for 1 and a green. We got a 1/1 Snake Shaman that we can sacrifice to search for a basic land, put it onto the battlefield tapped, and shuffle our library. What's nice about this one actually ramps, doesn't go into our hand. And of course, when we play it, it's actually a chump blocker till the end of our turn, because if somebody should want to attack us in the meantime, we can still block with it, and then in response, sacrifice to make sure that and we stopped the attack and we ramped and we didn't take any damage. Farhaven Elf, it costs 2 and a green, so for 3 mana, it's a 1/1. It's an Elf Druid. When it enters the battlefield, we're going to search our library for a basic land card and put it onto the battlefield tapped, so it mana ramps us as well. Far Wanderings is up next for 2 and a green. It's a sorcery. We're going to search our library for a basic land card, put it onto the battlefield tapped, so it ramps us just as a Farhaven Elf, except this one's got Threshold, which means that if we have 7 or more cards in our graveyard, we're going to look for 3 basic land cards and put them onto the battlefield tapped. So that is going to be super sweet for later. Cultivate costs 2 and a green, so for 3 mana, we're going to search our library for 2 basic land cards. We're going to put one of them onto the battlefield tapped, and we're going to keep the other one into our hand. Harrow is up next for 2 and a green. It's an instant this time. All these cards have been sorceries or sorcery speed in the form of creatures, but this is an actual instant. And when we do play, we do need to sacrifice a land, but we can, of course, sacrifice one of the lands that we use to cast Harrow, and then we're going to search for 2 basic land cards and put them onto the battlefield. Now, these are not tapped, which means essentially this only costs us 1 mana, because after we play this, we're going to have still 2 untapped lands that we can use. Yavimaya Elder is up next for 1 and 2 green. It's a 2/1 human druid. When it's put into the graveyard from the battlefield, we may search our library for 2 basic land cards, reveal them, put them into our hands. So don't really ramp us, but they do color fix us and make sure that we got extra lands in our hands. And of course, for 2 and sacrificing it, we can draw a card. So essentially what you're going to want to do is you're going to want to keep this on the battlefield, and when you're running low on cards, if somebody attacks you, we're going to chump block with it, pay the 2 mana, sacrifice it, we stop the damage, we drew a card, and we're going to go look for those 2 basic lands to put into our hand. Hunting Wilds is up next for 3 and a green. It's a sorcery that allows us to search for 2 basic forest, 2 forest cards and put them onto the battlefield tapped and shuffle our library. And of course, if we paid an additional 4 mana on top of this, so if we paid 8 mana total, we of course also look for the lands, but also all forests that came into play this way are untapped, so we get to use them again, and they become 3/3 green creatures green creatures with haste. And this is not till the end of turn. So basically those 2 forests that you looked for are now also 3/3 creatures. Don't really recommend doing that unless you really need to attack with 2 3/3s that turn. Otherwise, just leave them as lands, because after all, when they're creatures, they also have a chance of dying. Explosive Vegetation is our very last ramp card, and that costs 3 and a green. It's a sorcery. We're going to search our library for 2 basic land cards. So this doesn't have to be 2 forests. This can be any basic lands. We're going to put them onto the battlefield tapped and then shuffle our library. That is it for the ramp cards. Let's have a look at the lands. Wizards of the Coast has divided these lands into 6 swamps, 5 mountains, 7 forests, and 25 non-basic lands. Okay, let's have a look at the non-basics. First, we have Jungle Hollow, which comes in tapped but can give us a black or a green mana, and also gives us a life when it comes in, which is the same as Akoum Refuge, but now it gives us black or red. And Kazandu is the same, Kazandu Refuge, but this time it gives us a red or a green. Then we have Golgari Rot Farm, which enters battlefield tapped, and we must return a land we control back to our hand, but it taps for a black and a green. We also have Rakdos Cranarium, which is the same but gives us black and red, and Gruul Turf, which gives us green and red. And of course, what's really cool is if we want to get those multiple cast triggers, landfall triggers, we just make sure that we can return Gruul Turf to our hand every single time, for example, and replay it every single time. And then, sure, we're not getting mana ramp, we're not getting ahead on lands, but we are getting a landfall trigger every single turn. Baron Moor comes in tapped and gives us a black mana, but we can also cycle it for single black, which means we can discard this card and then draw a card, which means that if we care about something that cares about when a land hits the graveyard, then we can use this and still draw a card on top of that, which is the same as Forgotten Cave, but now it gives us red, and Tranquil Thicket, but now it gives us green. Colony Garden comes in tapped, gives us a green when tapped, but also enters the battlefield or also gives us a 0/1 plant creature token when it enters the battlefield. Nice little chump blocker. Savage Lands enters tapped, but can tap for either a black, a red, or a green, which is nice. It's exactly the colors we want. And Command Tower doesn't come in tapped, so it immediately taps for a mana of any color of our commander's color identity, which is, of course, black, red, and green. Rocky Tar Pit is a land that enters tapped, but we can tap and sacrifice it to search our library for a swamp or mountain and put it onto the battlefield. So it gives us that multiple landfall triggers, because of course when this one comes in, and then when we sack it, we get the swamp or the mountain. And we have Mountain Valley, which also comes in tapped, but we can tap it and sacrifice it to search for a mountain or forest and put it into play. Once again, the double landfall trigger, which is kind of the same as Jund Panorama, which taps for a colorless mana. We can pay a mana and tapping it and sacrifice it to search for a basic swamp, mountain, or forest card, putting it onto the battlefield tapped. So now it gives us any one of those 3 basics. Warped Landscape also gives us a colorless mana when tapped, but we can also pay 2 mana and tap it to sacrifice it and search our library for a basic land card and put it onto the battlefield tapped. A little bit steeper cost than the other ones, but then again, it doesn't come in tapped, and it also gives us a colorless straight away. Myriad Landscape enters tapped, gives us a colorless, and we can also pay 2 and sacrifice it, but now we're going to look into our library for 2 basic land cards that share a land type, so this is going to have to be 2 mountains, 2 forests, or 2 swamps. We're going to put those onto the battlefield, tapped, and shuffle our library. Then we have Blighted Woodland, taps for a colorless, but we can pay 4 mana, of which one of them has to be green, and sacrifice, search our library for 2 basic land cards, put them onto the battlefield, tapped, and shuffle our library. So much less good than the Myriad Landscape, although we can use it right away because it doesn't come in tapped. Grim Backwoods gives us a colorless, but we can also pay 2, a black and a green, so for 4 mana, and sacrificing a creature to draw a card. So that's nice for those 0/1 plant tokens, for example, or when you're in a pinch, just turn those creature tokens into draws. Hunted Fengraf taps for a colorless, and we can also pay 3 and tap it to sacrifice it to return a creature card at random from our graveyard to our hand. I don't really like the effects that much when it's random, except for the Moldgraph Monstrosity, which gives us 3 things at random, but, you know, in a pinch, it could be nice. And Bojuka Bog, which enters the battlefield tapped, gives us a black, but when it tapped, but it also exiles all cards from target player's graveyard when it comes in, which is nice, super nice against graveyard shenanigans. Forge of Heroes taps for a colorless, but we can also tap it and make sure that our commander gets a plus an additional loyalty counter when it comes in. Should our commander be a creature, it will get a +1/+1 counter. Temple of the False God taps for 2 colorless mana rather than just 1. However, we can only use this if we have 5 or more lands, and of course, it counts itself as a land as well, so we need 4 other lands on top of this to work. And then finally, we close it all out with the ubiquitous Terramorphic Expanse and Evolving Wilds, ever-present awesome cards in this deck, but also because of the double landfall trigger. That is it for the lands. Let's have a look at the conclusion. In conclusion, from the commander, it's very clear that this deck wants to be a landfall, land matters deck, and a lot of the cards in there also point you in that direction. But when you're really looking at all the cards together, you know there's a lot of holes. You see that with all the random cards they've put in, there just seem to be too many cards which have no place in this deck, which are just fun cards for perhaps another deck, and they put them in there because they're just good, or they might be fun, or they just design them. And I don't feel that this deck has a lot of synergy in that sense. And that's kind of a shame, because we had, of course, Gitrog Monster, which is a great commander for Lands Matters, and this one actually gives you red on top of that, so it should give you so many more possibilities to get an even more fun and versatile Lands Matters deck. Therefore, I believe that yes, it can be a lot of fun, this deck. I think people could have a lot of fun with it, but we highly recommend you get either these upgrade cards that we suggested today, or other ones, to make sure that it really starts to synergize well and really starts carrying, counting about those lands, and not just have fun big tramplers or whatever, or recasting instants of sorceries or something. Just try and keep this deck on focus. What does this deck want to do? It wants to grab a lot of lands, it wants to recur a lot of lands, it wants to play a lot of lands, and just try and stick to that, and you will have a lot of fun. So it's also we did the calculation, it's below $25, all the upgrades. You can really go and get those right now. And as we said already, we do recommend that you do upgrade this deck if you're going to get it. Also, if you would like to head on over to patreon.com/budgetmtgdecks if you like these videos, if you like what we do, if you want to help out the show with as little as $1 a month to make sure that we can continue making these videos, just head on over there, check out what the reward tiers are, and we would really appreciate that. And also thank you very much for our current patrons for making these videos possible. Also join us on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter to see the pictures of the stuff that we're doing right now, whenever we're playing games or non-budget upgrades for decks, or just hanging out with us. Just head on over there, ask us questions, and that is how you get social with us. And to make sure you never miss another one of our videos, subscribe to us here on YouTube for the most powerful decks and device everyone can afford. And also don't forget the little bell button to be part of the notification crew and get notified as soon as a new video comes out. Well, that was it. Thanks for watching. I'm David. This was Budget MTG Decks.